Good evening, everyone. In the evening, it started raining, so I hope the weather is much pleasant now. Okay, we have seen a lot of thunder and rains here in the evening, so I believe everybody is having a pleasant evening. Let's wait for some time, let people join in, and then we'll continue with our session. We'll have Dhaval Bhai already joined with us, so as long as I see some more people, we'll start with the session because we have a lot to cover. In this session, so he has to go through a lot of demos. So we are a bit short on time on that aspect as well. So we are gonna be very quick, and I believe everybody got a chance to see the Gitbook that I had shared on our meetup messages, so that you guys have some kind of a pre-context to what kind of different features we are trying to cover part of this session. Okay, we are waiting for a few more folks. Let them join in, and we'll start the session. Guys, just say hi in the chat so that I know. Yeah, I see Kaivalya in the chat now. Okay, waiting for a few more folks. Sorry for that. Okay, I think, Dhaval, let's start with your session. Okay, Dhaval bhai, you can start with your session. I think meanwhile, let everybody join in. Okay.
Sure. Thank you, Ankit bhai. First of all, extremely sorry for the last week. I had to cut short the session. I had to run for something, and I couldn't actually finish the session. So again, we'll kind of fast track some of the things that we covered in last week, and then we'll resume with the remaining things in this session. So let me share my screen. Yep. Share my screen. I hope it is visible. We will go with a slightly bigger. So the session, as I did go through some of the slides in last week. It is all about the authentication, authorization, and in a very general term, we'll just consider that as an auth part, and in the context of serverless application. So just to have a quick background, the serverless applications are all distributed. There is no kind of a always running thing. Ideally, that is the go-to architecture where you have everything which you are using as and when required. So everything is divided, distributed. There is no shared constantly running resource which you go for whenever you want to do the authentication or authorization. So in the context of auth in general, we are looking at two things. One is an authentication. So that means who the person is. So whenever someone says that this is my username and this is my password, how do we recognize that that's the same person who is actually giving us the credentials? And the authorization part, where we it depends, varies from the application to application and the feature to feature, but that in general means that whether the person or the incoming request has enough permission to execute the feature or trying to work on the resource or not. So that is a two part, authentication and authorization. In case of authentications, we have a standard simple login, the very orthodox plain vanilla approach, where we collect the username and password, email or the password or something else, and then we validate based on that. We generate some kind of a token, cookie, or something which actually can identify the subsequent request and validate with that. The second most popular approach is basically sign in via the third-party provider. So existing and authenticated identities like the Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon. So those become the standard sign-in identity providers. And our application is allowing the users to actually sign in using the third-party providers instead of we provide our own mechanism to create the username and password. Because eventually, if everyone has like a huge number of services that they are using, so that is one of the very go-to and standard approach. And I think all of us are using it one or another way. Authorization part, again, the same. Every application has some kind of an endpoint. So this comes into the picture when the request is coming in to try to access some resource. The simple example that I actually give to the users or to the people who actually ask me about the flow is, if every one of us are using the LinkedIn, right? So every now and then they actually send us the email that your one of your contact is now onto the LinkedIn, or they send us an email that you want to invite these contacts to LinkedIn or not. So those contacts, they are actually fetching from the Google. If you have linked your Gmail or Google account, they fetch the contacts from there. So indirectly, we are giving the LinkedIn the access to our Google, and in a restricted way. So that is the oath and the scope part, which I'll cover into later slides. And the next is options for the oath. The standard options are whether we use the existing mechanism, we write the code, which actually goes to the database, validate the incoming credentials, email password, username password. We use the service like Amazon Cognito, which does the similar thing, which provides all the authentication mechanism and the authorization mechanism. Auth0 and Okta are extremely popular. Both of them has wide variety of features, and they are extremely popular in the community as well. So, but yes, when it comes to the Cognito and the other providers, there is always some kind of a feature gap between those. So these are some of the popular auth options. And then at last, it all depends on what do we need to protect and how do we need to protect. So we'll look at a step-by-step approach on how we are actually doing that. So in this case, what we are going to do is we are taking the two approach. One is the infrastructure services, S3, DynamoDB, and the application APIs. Like I have created some APIs which I want to actually restrict or I want to allow based on the access rights. So I will go through that as well. So before I go into the Cognito part, I want to lay out this I actually covered in the last session as well. But when we talk about the APIs are basically divided into two categories. One is a entirely private APIs. Basically, you need to, before you call the API, you need to pass some kind of a header, some kind of a token. Then only you will be able to execute the APIs. So those are basically key-based APIs. You have created keys, and if you get the keys into the header, then only the API will continue the execution, not otherwise. And the second one is a public API, which is exposed to everyone, but they actually internally, they do the validation based on the user. So every user has to carry their own credentials to allow the further execution to the API, and that is the two standard division that we see. Now, when we are actually building the normal APIs, something for the experimentation purpose or just local development, many of the times what we do is we just create the public APIs, let it deploy and forget about it, because we realize that nobody else is going to use those. So it is fine to have it open. But if I usually suggest that if you are actually building it again for your purpose or for some kind of a tooling or running it from the cron jobs or terminal or XYZ, still make it private, so that you know that you have certain assets which is running in the cloud, but it is only accessible by you or only accessible by some clients which you have defined by you or your team. So even if someone shares the URL or something, or someone get to know the URL or something, they'll still not be able to call the APIs directly. So based on the experience of the last week, what I did is I realized that why not convert this small use case into some kind of an application which through which I can show the different concepts of the authentication and authorization mechanism. So I took a very simple use case that we want to build on top of the existing AWS services, kind of a simple application which allows the logged in user to upload the files and download the files. Now, it's a very simple mechanism, but we are using a number of services to do that. The first thing is the service, the application itself will be hosted onto the S3. So this is the simple service. I will also make it a bit large so that it is visible. It's a very simple service. I have all of you already have received the message from Ankit, so I assume you have the URL, but otherwise it's I'll drop the URL of the Git book later on. So this is a simple service which is hosted onto my S3 bucket. It does nothing. It allows me to actually sign up. It allows me to do logging. It allows me to actually view the public files. It allows me to actually upload my own files, so that I call the private files. And I can actually download my files. I can delete my files. And this is basically kind of a dev setup. So I can see all the logs, what is happening, everything from here. So it's not a finished production ready application. It is just meant for illustrating some of the features and the services of the AWS. So it's a very simple thing. And what I have done is I have put some additional context. So let's say I'm designing this entire application from an organization's point of view. So I run a company and we have, let's say we have 10, 15 people. And I want to actually set up a kind of a file sharing. We usually use the Google Drive or Dropbox or something else, but I want to build something similar here as well. So we have a set of users. Few users will work as admins, and rest of the users will just join in as part of the overall group. That's a Cognito group, and they will be able to actually upload their files, and admins can upload the files which is visible to everyone. So there are a number of things happening. One is that we are actually defining an S3 bucket. I'm sure all of you are at least familiar with some of the basic concepts of S3 bucket. So S3 bucket can do, I mean, dozens of things, and the most common thing is to actually store the files. Although it is an object storage, but we usually store the files, small size, large size, different things. So we are using S3 as a storage of all the files. Now, in that, we are actually defining the buckets. So I'll show the structure of the S3 as well. It is loading up. And so this is the structure of the S3. What I have done is I have actually created two folders inside S3. Now, the good thing about the AWS is that a lot of the IAM policies take into consideration the prefix as well. So we are using the S3 with some kind of a prefix mechanism. So I have created two folders, public files and users. Public files will have all the shared files inside it, and the users will have their different folders depending on who sign up and who is accessing the overall solution. So each folder will be owned by a particular user, and they can actually upload their own file and download the files. So with the mechanism policy, we are restricting the user access to their own subfolders. So even though they can actually access the applications, they have this application is directly interacting with S3 directly from the browser, they will still be able to access only their folder. They'll not be able to access any other folder. So organization or whitelist users will be able to sign up. So in that, I'm using the Cognito hook that also will see. Users can upload public private files from the web page, directly from the web page. So I'll show how we are doing that using the JS SDK. Public files will be visible to all authenticated users. So even to see the files, you need to actually first sign up and log in. Now that actually contradicts with this part. The sign up is allowed only to the organizational users. So if I'm building this for my company, which is AppGambit, so only the people carrying the appgambit.com will be able to sign up and log in. Or else I have to put a whitelist set of email users who will be able to do the sign up and login. Users can comment on public files or on their private files. This is to showcase the API part. users can share their private files with others. So in this case, we it is still not there. That section is not there here, but it will be soon up there. So in that also, I'm using the API and I'm using the kind of a pre-signed URL. So through that, you can actually share the private object in the S3 with others. Now, why serverless? So again, this topic is all about the serverless and the authentication part. So this particular scenario is kind of fitting well into the serverless architecture, because we are kind of going to use this application not every single second and not heavily. This is going to be used in the cases where I want to upload something, or someone wants to download, and at the same time I want to kind of keep everything light. So if there is a usage, it will work. If there is no usage, there will be no infrastructure. So basically, the ephemeral infrastructure or pay per use or the run when you need, all those things fit quite well in this particular scenario. Again, just to make sure, this application is not meant for the production use case, but we never know. I mean, I'm keep adding more features, so it can actually work just fine in a moderate use case as well. So before we start, I have put the source code into the Git repo as well, and there are a few things I have mentioned. So we'll be using the Cognito features, we'll be using the IAM features, the policy and permissions, and then we are using the JS SDK to actually combine all of these things together to put up the entire use case. So make sure that if you are referring to the Git book, you go through these things and set up your environment before you start. So these are just standard permissions. I have the public read get object, so that is assigned as soon as you are logged in, your own bucket, and the standard course configurations, because we are going to use the S3 bucket directly from our browser. So we need to assign the course permission so that the SDK, JS SDK, AWS JS SDK can directly work with S3 bucket or S3 API. So the authentication and the authorization part. Now there are right around this. So past few days, I've been seeing the number of articles coming up, whether it's a Dev2 or some other places. So the one very recently came on Dev2 from the Keen Mehta. So she was working for Auth0, a very good at a very good position, and now she works for the developer relations at Gatsby. So she has written an excellent article around the overall concepts of OIDC, OAuth, the standard authentication mechanisms, the tokens, the access tokens, the ID tokens, claim. Everything is summarized into this. It's a very lengthy article, but it is summarized really well. So I'll still suggest that we may not be able to, I'll not be able to cover all the concepts of OIDC, OAuth, or claims, or tokens, or the difference between the access token, ID token, refresh token. Go through these kind of things, because identity as a topic itself is a very wide area, and it is very unlikely that you will be using all of these things together. But whenever you are building something around that, you still need to know the underlying concepts. If you are using something like the Okta or Auth0, then they are actually hiding a lot of internal mechanics right inside their the wrappers, and all you get is an endpoint. So in case of Cognito, because of the documentation, I mean, this is something that you will be hearing a lot, that Cognito documentation is very cryptic. It takes a lot of time to understand what is going on, put everything together. So for us also, for me also personally, I need to look things from time to time if I'm doing something new with the Cognito as a service. Cognito is a native authentication provider. You can say the directory, user directory provider. So it allows you to manage two things. It allows you to create the user pool. So that is the place where you'll be storing all of your the user data, and it allows you to create the identity pools, which can actually give you the AWS credentials to start using the AWS different AWS services. So many times you can actually use the user pool and identity pool independently, and you can combine those two together to actually get the credentials or get the tokens for your application. One of the reasons why I actually prefer to go with Cognito is because it's very cheap, and for first 50,000 active monthly users, it is free. So if your application is coming in that range, it is still much better. If you are exceeding that, then also you are your application is doing very good, something very good, so you'll not have any major problem around the billing cycle. But if your application is taking in just few hundred to few thousand, I think Cognito will be a very good fit to manage all your credentials and the authorization part. So we'll quickly look at the application itself. It's a very simple application. What I have done is it takes in, you can do the registration. We are keeping the simple attributes. We are taking in the email. Username is mandatory for the login. Password, confirm password. Once you are registered, you will receive a verification email with a 6-digit token. That token you need to provide, and then you are basically kind of your user is created, and you will see your user into the Cognito user pool as well. Once that is done, you can do the login. I have already one user. I'll log in with that, and it does number of things. It actually contacts the user pool. It fetches the credentials. It converts that into the. It then contacts the identity pool and fetches the token. And we'll see the internal of that also once. So this, you can see the number of things. ID token is something of our interest, but we'll go into that later on. So let's start with the Cognito as a service. So by default, if you are, this is my pool. So when I talk about the user pool, it is basically asking us that what kind of features that your pool, user pool, is going to support. So we can go with simple setup, required test pool. It actually asks us all these standard configurations. If you are building your own authentication system, you will also keep those in mind. The first thing is whether your users will log in with the email or whether your user will log in with a username. Okay, and password will still be there. Second, what kind of attributes your authentication system or your basically auth service. Now everything is microservice. So let's assume that you are building an auth as a microservice. So what kind of attributes that your service will store, whether it's just a username, password, email, phone number, or you have additional services. So Cognito has taken care of those things as well. It actually allows you to keep number of attributes for each identity inside the Cognito itself, so that you do not need to replicate those somewhere else into your database. And at the same time, besides having the standard attributes, you can actually add the custom attribute as well. So something, if you see that it is not available, you can actually create your own attribute and then save it here as well. So we are not going to do that. Go next. Second thing is around the password policy. Now it is very common thing to actually have a very simple or a very static password policy for long period of time. This is something that when you are designing the application, if you have a very if you need to follow certain compliance, then only you pay attention to. Otherwise, you'll just keep it very standard: 8 characters, alphanumeric, special character, one number, one small, one capital. So all those things are also taken care of by the Cognito itself. So this is all part of the user pool configuration itself, that you can actually define your password policy, and then Cognito will take care of the validations and other part. Multi-factor factor authentication, as I mentioned in my last session as well, it is increasingly become a very popular thing to have MFA, and many of the business applications requires to have MFA enabled. They are now no more considering the username and password as a standard mechanism, authentication mechanism, and they want to make sure that if their employees or if their users are using the system, it has to be two-factor enabled. How the account will be recovered because there are multiple attributes, there are multiple options here as well. Which attributes you want to verify. So this is the post sign up or a verification process which will be required on the password, forgotten password, or the new account sign up as well. So depending on what attributes you are taking as a primary, you can decide those here. Because if you have the OTP enabled, the Cognito will have to send the SMS as well, and here you are just creating a role so that Cognito gets the permission to actually do that. SES, Verification email comes via the SES, so you need to define the SES configurations. SES is available only in a limited region, so it is asking for which region that you want to actually configure for sending out the verification and other emails. Whether the email will come from the SES or will come from the Cognito. So in this case, if I'm setting SES, then it will use my SES configuration. If it's coming from the Cognito, it will come from a very standard this no reply at verification email.com. So if you are getting an email from this kind of email, it is basically Cognito is sending that email for the service. And some customization around the messaging. So like here, verification code, after the new sign up, it comes with a simple subject and a simple message. You can customize that. This is a very recent one, just an hour back. I actually tried something, and this is how it comes, subject and your verification code here. You can actually also do the link part as well. So here you can actually convert that into the link. Then it will give you a link, full link, and you click on that and it will actually do the verification process, or you can do it with the code as well. Invitation message, again, you can customize those. Tag for a number of things, cost allocation, and just to make sure that your resources are identified as part of a single package, so you can actually add tagging as well. This is kind of a useful when you are using the Cognito or authentication from the devices, from the applications, mobile applications. You want to actually detect whether the user is coming back from the same device or user has changed the device. And this also helps if you have the advanced security feature enabled into the Cognito, because there it is using the adaptive authentication, adaptive security. So it kind of detects the device switchings and geolocations and many other things. So this, in our case, we are not enabling this because we are not using that feature. But if you enabled it or opt in it, then you can actually keep those configurations as well. Now, I have worked with a system where we had to do all these things by our own code. So we had to take in the parameter from our application or send additional data from the browser, capture additional data from the browser, and then save it into our database. But in this case, all of those things are happening, and then Cognito is managing those things. So it's a kind of a big load shifted to the service directly, and you are not worried, or you do not need to keep those things into consideration while you are building your application. So it's kind of an undifferentiated heavy lifting is shifted to the AWS services, and you are just focusing on to the business logic part. Now, this is a very important thing, and for this, this is a place where you have kind of defined your user pool, and now you are defining who will access this user pool. So the first hand is that you are actually creating the application. So my application, in this case, this is my application. This is my web application, which is going to access this particular user pool, which I have created. So what I'll do is I'll go back to the user pool which I have created, and I'll show. So I have kept the configurations as it is. There is no difference. So I'll directly go to the app client. So this is the client that I have created. This client is part of the application itself. So it will create configurations, and I have given the configurations here. Now here, I'm using the AWS JS SDK, which works slightly different compared to the app or the OAuth client. When you are creating a new application client, this part is really important if you are actually creating using via the JS SDK. Client secrets are basically a second kind of a secret only, similar to how we have the secret into AWS credential as well. So secret should not be exposed to your public domain. So when you are working with JS SDK, it does not support the secret. So you by default actually uncheck that. So there is no secret generated. So that is what has happened in our case as well. So I'm using the vanilla client, which only works with the client ID, and rest of the things are happening onto the backend. So I'm not using any client secret, and I'm relying onto the Cognito and identity pool configurations to return me the access token with the AWS credential to use further. So if you are working with AWS JS SDK for Cognito, you do not need to enable that. I have put a full mention of that as well. So I'll continue a few things from here. So here we are building the very simple user pool. Then we are moving on to creating the client. And if you are building it for the front-end applications, that is a web application from the JavaScript, we do not need to select the client secret. We just need to create a client that will generate the configurations, and those configuration is what we'll be using inside our JavaScript files. So I'm using the user pool ID, I'm using the client ID, we have to give the region, and we have to give the identity pool if we have one. But let's say that we do not have that for now. So going to the next part. So here we are actually, this is the same application which you will copy from the GitHub. You can upload it to your S3 bucket with the CORS permission and everything else. And then you have to just provide this part, the user pool ID, the client ID, which you have just created for our application, front-end application. You can have the multiple client as well. You can have one for the front-end application. You have one for the mobile application as well, and you can have a different one for your different application. All are using the same user pool. So you are using the same user database, which has all the detail of the user, their username, password, email, credentials, attributes, everything there. And then you are using the same user base for multiple clients. So you can actually you can have the multiple applications sharing the same user pool as well. So in this case, if you do not provide the Cognito identity pool, or provide the basic one, here we are creating the basic one. So let's say go into the identity pool. This is my identity pool. So your user pool gives you just an ID token. It actually validates the user and it returns that whether this user exists or not. If you want to access the AWS services, you need the credentials. You need the access key and you need the access secret key. That credential is only generated by the STS. And with the help of identity pool, we can actually generate those credentials. So I have assigned, there are two, let me go back to the create part. So once I create the user pool, and if I want my application to acquire the access tokens to access other services, like in our case, we are going to use the S3 directly from the browser, then I need to actually generate the access token as well. So in that case, I will have to create the identity pool. So I'll provide the identity pool name, and here I'm providing what will be the authentication provider. So I'm using the Cognito pool. So I need to provide my pool ID and I need to provide the client. So in that case, the client becomes important because now client will decide that this particular identity pool or this particular authorization server will be allowed for this client. So I can have multiple identity pool depending on the application, and I can actually create a multiple application on top of my existing Cognito user pool. Authentication provider, I'm providing the pool ID, client ID, I'm creating the pool, and then it will actually assign two roles. So that will go and check. You can have the, so identity pool will create the unauthenticated identities as well. So you can actually assign two separate roles. There are many applications which actually allows you to access the resources, access the features, even though you are not signing. So that is called the guest identity. You are not, there is no identity of the user inside the system, but still it tracks, and then you can allow the user to access resources based on the guest role. So you can actually define two roles, unauthenticated role and authenticated role. Authenticated role is for someone who has passed the Cognito user pool authentication, and then this role will be assigned to their access token. And then unauthenticated role is someone who has not logged in yet, but their identity is already created. So you can actually, depending on your application's requirement, you can actually allow or deny certain things based on that. So in our case, I have kept the unauthenticated role as a vanilla. There is no access rights to that because I don't want them to see anything, and the authenticated role has everything. So once we do the setup, it will generate this kind of an identity pool ID, which we need to provide into our application. So we are using that into our identity pool ID configurations. So now our initial configuration of building the user pool, building the client, and then building the identity provider is complete. So this is a sequence. First, you create the identity pool, user pool. So that will host all your user informations, credentials, all the personal details, and everything is secured there. Then you create an application on top of that. Who will use the user pool? So after you define that, you will create the identity pool. That what kind of permissions, what kind of access I want to give to this particular application and this particular pool. So that completes the one cycle of configuration that I have defined all these things, and now it is ready to use. We are giving few additional parameters because this is the working application. So we are giving the S3 bucket and other things. Now this will generate the identity pool ID, which we can actually use into our application. Now I put, if you give that and if you do the login, it will actually return these kind of a tokens. So it will return the access key, it will return the secret key. This is the temp session, and it will return the session token as well. Now session token is important because that will allow us to use other services. So that will be used in a normal, if you use the Node.js and you use the APIs like DynamoDB S3 from your backend, either from your containers or a direct program or from the Lambda, you create the new AWS and then .s3 or DynamoDB client or something like that. So you need to provide, if you are running in an if you are running in a kind of a inside the AWS environment, so your environment itself has some role. So if you are using EC2, your EC2 has a role, and that role will be propagated back to your application. If you are using the container inside the Fargate or ECS, that execution role or that container role will be propagated to your application. So you do not need to actually explicitly mention the access key and secret anywhere. The access key and secret you need to mention if you are trying to access AWS from your local machine, because that is outside the AWS environment. So in this case, what is happening is the Cognito, along with the identity pool and the STS, that is secure token service, is generating the temporary tokens for your application to use, okay, and pass that into the headers, and so that your service can authenticate the incoming request. So this is just that. Now, coming back to the next part. So far we have done the setup, and then we are just making sure by giving the right parameter, we can see that the users are created. So for that, we'll go to user pool and see how many users that I see in that service. So here I can see two users. I have Dhawal_admin. So that is my email for an admin purpose. And I have Dhawal_n, which is a kind of a separate user, which has a normal access. So these users are created and saved inside. The important part in OIDC or in OAuth context is this sub part, which actually identifies a particular user uniquely. Now, if you want to propagate the credentials or identity back to your other services like S3 or DynamoDB, you want to store things, you want to actually create the policies through which your users can access its own records in the DynamoDB. You can use the sub, you can use the policy prefix and everything to restrict that user can only query. That means only can do the scan or query or get item, put item based on this sub ID only. So there are policy variables we can use along with Cognito variables, and you can define this fine-grained access control as well. In case of S3, how we are doing is that we are actually creating the sub folders inside our users folder with the similar name. So this is actually creating the using the sub to build up the folder, and inside the folder the user has access to upload, download and delete files. I'll show you a small example of that. Logged in as an admin. If I do the list, it will return the public files. For all those things, it is directly connecting with S3. So this URL is going for the URL, Cognito, and the user pools. This URL is directly going to the S3. We are not, so far, we have not built any APIs. There is no backend for this application so far. It is contacting the Cognito. It is actually getting the credentials, and it is directly using the target AWS services to upload, download, and view files. If you go to the identity pool, you'll see the similar identity of that user there as well. These are the identities that it has created. And here it will have a linkage to the Cognito user pool identity. So you will not be able to directly see what exactly is the username password here, but it will be a linked identity. So Cognito user pool passes the identity here, and the identity browser just maintains that. It doesn't maintain the full detail of the user directly. Now, the next section is, so we have created the service which allows us to host the users. It allows us to create the permissions and allocate the permissions. But then what happens next? So how do we provide the policy and configurations? So like I mentioned, the identity pool has the unauthenticated and authenticated roles. So we can actually configure those roles with an additional permission based on what we need to see. So this is a very simple example. So what I'm doing is I'm allocating an additional policy, allow listing of public folders to authenticated user. So this is the new policy created and attached to the authenticated role. And what will happen is it will allow that user to have the read permission on public files inside the bucket that I have created. So from that point onward, everything is all around the configurations. Otherwise, I would have written a logic where I will take in the request, I'll check what the user, whether the user is authenticated or not, and then get the list of the files either from the database or either query the S3 directly and return that list back, and then the UI will display the list. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm actually just defining the permissions, and then based on the calls, the front end will able to make only queries into that area. If there is no permission to that, the front end will throw an error because there is no permission to that. So I'm cutting down the API and with the policies part. This is the same. I'm creating the public files in the user. These are the structures on top of which I'll write the policies to have an access to that. Validating the permissions. This is we already did from this part. I refresh. It will allow me to get files. If I refresh list my files, there is no file, so it is saying there is no file. But all the API calls are working fine. There is no error because I have the full policy mentioned in the backend. So this is the next policy that I'm attaching to the authenticated role. So here I'm using the Cognito variables. So these are the places where your identity provider, if you are using the native services, it will become very kind of intuitive and very easy to integrate that service with your overall business logic. Now, in a normal case, you would have written an API, you would have written your additional logic to make sure that you only allow the access to a certain part and not allow the same user access to the other areas. So you need to either use some kind of an API or some kind of a different mechanism to do that. But in this case, because our Cognito variables are propagated to the policy as well, so I have defined a very simple list that allow listing of user folder. That means my access token should have access to only the folder which is starting with this. So I'm basically putting a policy condition where it will check that the S3 list bucket permission will only work on this subfolder. So even though I acquire a token and I, by one or the another way, I acquire another ID of someone else, another user, I will not be able to fire a request which will actually return me the list of that user's file, because this is only going to work on under my folder and not on another user's folder. So internally it is managing the security part as well, and at the same time I'm getting away with writing the additional APIs just to filter out the user files for a particular user. So there is no database I have created. Because I just wanted to list, I have done that using the policy and showing that how we can actually get away with some of those things. Second thing is I want to also allow the read write access to only my folder. So in that case also I'm giving the get, put and delete. So user can upload a file, user can download a file, and user can delete their own file and not anything else. So I can see the public files, but I cannot delete them, I cannot upload anything directly there. So that I have done with the Cognito variable. You can actually put the additional condition, and depending on that it will work. No additional API required here as well. Here is some of the example of using the S3js SDK. So because we have already defined the access token inside our AWS kind of an instance in that area, so we don't need to I'll show you how. So as soon as I find an active session, what I do is I actually acquire the tokens and I set that into the current configurations. So once this configuration is done, whatever that you create with your AWS SDK, it will automatically acquire the policy. Now, if you're already working with AWS SDK, either from your local machine or from a different on a backend environment, you know that once you actually define the access key and secret in your config section, that means that execution flow will acquire all the permissions or all the rules and policy defined to that. So here it is defined. So now all I have to do is just create the S3 instance and start uploading the file. It will work because I have this particular instance, this particular session has the permission to execute that. Download will also work because the get object permission is given. So here I'm just downloading it directly. You can show and delete as well. Because I have a delete object permission, it will work just fine as well. And let me show you a simple thing directly. Uploading a new file successfully uploaded. It is using a direct upload, so that is directly uploading to S3. If I do the list, it will come into that as well. I have just uploaded. This is coming into the GMT, that's why. And if I say delete, so again, I have put the logs here just for the understanding. So if you are going through the same application step by step, you realize what is happening at what time and how the APIs are responding. So if I do the delete, it will call the deleted file. It will delete the file. And when I do the next list, it will not fetch anything. It's a vanilla JavaScript. I'm not using React, Angular, anything of that sort, because the oral demonstration is for the Cognito and the service part and not for the React Angular part. So that's why I've kept the JavaScript part very simple. Now moving on to the next thing. Now we'll go into some of the additional Cognito configurations. So what we have done is, in this case, we have used a simple email configuration. So Cognito will send the email directly for the verification and forget password thing. So if I want to change that to my own custom email, then I have an option to just let me just show it from here. We can actually give our own email. Customization. So we can actually define the SES region, the from email, whatever that we have, there are a number of emails that has been verified. and the from email address or the reply to, if we want to configure that way. So these are the standard configurations that we can do from here. Password policies, if I want to change, I can do it very easily from here, policies. Next thing is about the hook. So far what we have done is we have used, there is one specific thing that I wanted to show is around the token part. So I'll go to the console. Now, as I mentioned, the auth is not, will not be straightforward. It is not something, it is not the same time where the services are using the username and password or email the password, and then they are validating with the database that this is my email or this is my encrypted password, and then whether it is matching, then everything is working fine. So we are using the number of protocols, a number of identity technologies, namely the two very important and very popular, the OIDC, that is OpenID Connect, and the OAuth. Now, OIDC came later and OAuth came first. So in the early a few years back, when the rise of the social media and applications started integrating the Facebook or Twitter or the Gmail for one or another thing, either to access their APIs or access the details like the contact informations, or doing something on behalf of the user, like the Hootsuite, which allows you, or Buffer, which allows you to actually log into the Twitter via your Twitter credential, and then you are scheduling the tweets. So actual tweets are done by Hootsuite or Buffer, but you have authorized the application to access the Twitter. So that is basically called an OAuth flow. You are allowing your application to access the target applications, and that works with a number of things. So namely, you need to actually provide the application, you need to provide the scope, because you are not going to give your username and password of Twitter to the application. You are redirecting to the Twitter, and then Twitter will ask you that this application is asking for these resources to be used. So you will check that, similar to how when we install the application, it asks for the permissions, that this application requires these many permissions. Do you accept? And then only you allow that application to go forward. Similar to that, OAuth is basically an authorization. It's a delegated authorization protocol. There you are allowing one application to use your another applications. It is not an identity protocol, but people started using as a identity as well. So then the overall identity federation, so IETF and the identity federation, they come up with a second spec, that is an OpenID, which is only an identity kind of a protocol. It allows you to do the delegated identity or authentication mechanism, and then it generates the token. That token you can, or it generates the code. If I use the terminology, it generates the code, and that token, that code you can actually exchange with a access token, your ID. So I'll go to a couple of those things. So here is a standard OIDC flow. So you are relaying your username and password to the OIDC provider. So in our case, Cognito becomes an OIDC provider. You authenticate with that. It will return you a code. That code you again pass with your secret or your master key, and that returns you the access token, which you can then use to access the service. So this code, this access token is nothing but a JOT token. So I wanted to show that the structure of the JOT token. So ID token is an identity token. Access token is basically a service access token. It doesn't always follow the JOT part, but in most cases it follows the JOT part, but it's not compulsory to follow that. So JOT token is divided into three pieces. Your header, which contains the protocol and the algorithm used, RS or HS, and then the payload, which contains all the detail related to your identity. And the last is a crypto segment, which actually contains the signed identity. It is you need to provide the master key to actually encrypt that or decrypt that, and that is only done onto the server backend side. So this part, payload part, which is by default, this is a base 64 encoded. So you can decode it and you can actually extract a lot of information. So I have put a lot of detail around this, how you can identify. So we can use these things in a number of way, but how if there are any backend instances where you need to identify that who is my user. You have the sub, that is fine, but you have created an API and you want to attach or you want to do some additional things. So how do you identify who is actually making the request? So this payload part is something that you can actually also retrieve onto the backend as well. So either you are running in the Lambda or you are using the EC2 or container with a Node.js or Python application, then you can actually use this header, decode it, and then convert that into the JSON structure, and then you can actually extract all the information from there. So for one of the existing session, this one, this is what it is carrying. It is carrying the Cognito group that this user is part of. It is carrying the additional variables like whether the email is verified or not. It is carrying the additional roles because the group has an additional role. So it is carrying that as well. Issuer who has issued this particular token. So in that case, it's Cognito identity provider. The name, username of the Cognito identity. So that is my name. Cognito roles that is attached from the identity provider. So this is one directly attached, and this preferred are the secondary roles. The audience, event ID, token, auth time, expiry, issue date, and email. Number of things, but this is something where your knowledge or experience, or you need to go in some documentation of OIDC and OAuth to understand these things. I have put some detailing here for the flow, how it works, or who issues what kind of thing, and the structure of different tokens. But all those things are also covered in this demo application as well. So you can see the token, you can see the different access token as well, ID token, refresh token as well. By default, the access tokens are short length. Your mobile applications, you do not log in every time. So mobile applications, once they receive the access token, they actually refresh that with a longer refresh token. So refresh token, Auth0 says that their refresh tokens do not expire. You can put an expiry as well, but other than that, you can actually have an infinite amount of the token length. So that means once you logged in, you do not need to log in back, even though you come back after 30 days, 6 months, or 2 years. But in most other cases, you have some kind of a 30 days, 60 days, or every time you use the applications, you extend the token duration based on the refresh tokens. So these are the 3 standard tokens: ID token, which has your identity information; access token, which may be in JOT, so that is JSON Web Token format, or it may not be in the JOT format, but that actually does the validation of the access. And the refresh token is to actually get the next longer length access token. So those password policies. Now the next thing is Cognito can allow you to extend or modify your overall flow as well. So you have number of triggers which you can set up. So I have used one, that is pre-sign up. You want to validate few things before the user sign up. So in our context, the application is meant for a specific organization or for the whitelisted emails. So what I'll do is, if I just want to make sure that all the signups are coming from this particular domain, or all the signups are coming from this additional user emails. So if it is true, then only allow the sign up, otherwise throw an error. So I have put a very simple logic. So this is the logic. It actually passes the same information to your Lambda functions. I mean, this is the place where the Lambda or the serverless architecture becomes very kind of useful and fits into the overall situation just well. Till now, everything works without any servers. Everything is happening from the front end or directly using the third-party services. Now, I wanted to execute a small custom logic. Instead of setting up the whole server, instead of setting up the infrastructure, instead of thinking, what will I do? What will be the operating system and configurations? I just want to execute a small function on a particular trigger. My trigger is before the sign up happens, if you want to do anything or not, if you want to customize your authentication flow. So this is the place where I'm writing the Lambda functions. It is just validating simple thing that the domain has to be app gambit and the whitelist statement has to be required. There is none. So if it is anything from that, if it is from there, it will pass. If it is not from, it will throw an email. So it's a very simple thing. Taking some time to load. At PC. Sorry about that. Okay, while it is loading, we'll continue with other. So I have created two hooks. One for the sign up. You can have many other hooks as well. So there are pre-sign up, pre-authentication, custom message if you want to redirect or return a customized message for your flow. Post authentication, that is after the user is signed in. Post confirmation, you want to actually send out a custom email, or you want to send out or initiate another kind of a sequence. You want to put some information about the analytics or something like that. You can actually use a post confirmation, that is after the user is fully signed up into your system. Auth challenge, create auth challenge, verify. These are for customizing the overall authentication flow. If you want to inject something additional, adaptive measures or stuff like that. User migration is when you are actually moving the identity from your existing system to the Cognito user flow. You can actually execute the Lambda functions after that. So this is loaded. So let's give it a quick look. See. So if I try to register, your email or domain is not valid. Please sign up with your company email. So it is not returning this message. It is returning a different message, but I'll show you what I have done. So I have written this error from my hook. So it is throwing an error, email domain error. So this is the error code that it is returning. And I have customized into the UI side that if you find email domain error, then show this message. So this is again directly coming from the Cognito endpoint. I still haven't created any API. The function is doing all the validations. Notify user after sign up, still pending. Now, so far what we have seen is the users are attached with a direct identity provider role. So that is from here, they have the direct role, which is identity pool has given to them, and they have one role, whatever permissions that you have defined into that, those permissions are part of it. But I want to further narrow or further make a granular division into my entire user base. So Cognito gives the user the group access as well. So with the group, what we can do is we can actually so here I have a set of groups. So I have created an admin group. So you can actually define your different groups. So some applications will have the administrators, some applications will have the readers, the writers, or moderators, different sort of groups. Now you want to do some kind of either the service based restriction or allowing deny on that, or you want to do some kind of an application level functionality, like in this case, in the jot as we are seeing. So I can access the group into my backend as well. So this information is available inside my Lambda or inside my EC2 or container as well. If I want to do some kind of a functional logic based on the group I am part of, I can do that as well. But here, what I can do is this group can have its own role as well. So I can allocate an additional role to the group. So the reason this is helpful in our context is that if you are part of an admin group, you will have an access to do the put object onto the public files folder. So again, I'm getting away from the API. What I'm doing is I'm creating a group. If you are part of a group, you will have an additional role Okay, that role will have a permission through which you can actually access the restricted part, which is not available to other users. So with the help of a group and additional roles, I can actually extend, or I can kind of modify the permissions allocated to my the Cognito users. So that's why groups are also really powerful, and you with that you can actually do a whole set of additional featuring as well. Enable MFA is still not, I have not implemented that, so I'll not include this, but it can be configured, and based on the sequence, you can actually just do that, right? Now, so far, what I'll quickly go through, because we are already about the 1 hour, and like Ankit said that it is huge topic. The identity, the authentication part is not a very simple thing, that get the username, get the password, it will return something, and from that point onwards you have everything available. There are many places where you can configure different things, be it a Cognito, be it an IAM, be it a role allocated to that. Inside the Cognito, the role associated with the identity pool, the role associated with the Cognito group. But one specific thing which I wanted to show is around the API part. As we saw that we can have the public and the private API, how we can actually do those things. So application comes to the user pool, it generates the token. In our case, we are using the ID token, and then from that point onwards, it goes to the API gateway, and API gateway redirects to the Lambda. So how do we actually, so I'm using, which I'm going to actually, I have not published that to the public repo of this application, but I have the serverless application as well. So with that, it becomes very easy. If you are manually configuring these things, then it will take huge amount of time, and you will need to remember everything. So I have created an API for that. So this API is divided into different parts. I'll show some of the basic things. So you want to, by default, APIs are kind of a public. You have not attached anything. The first thing is that you want to protect your API with some kind of a fixed key. There is no Cognito, there is no user, but you want to generally protect your API with some kind of key. So anyone with the URL and key can call the API, and it will work just fine. So in that case, what will happen is you will need to use the usage plan and the API keys. Now, if you are doing that with SAM or serverless, it is very easy to configure. If you are doing it from the UI, you'll find it a bit difficult to set up everything. So I have this, if you go inside the API gateway, you can actually see, create the usage plan, you can create the API key, and then you can actually add few additional things. By default, this is meant for kind of a metered usage. So you want to public APIs, if you want to have a free or a premium plan, where the free plan will allow you to actually execute the API 100 times a day or 5,000 times in a month, that kind of thing, then you can actually do those quota throttling from here. So in our case, the only purpose to show this is that this is also one kind of a mechanism through which you can protect your APIs, which by default we do not consider that as a regular use case. But if you are already if you are experimenting with some kind of APIs for your non-user clients, either a programmatic access or from the terminals or from other tools or something, try to use the private APIs. You can pass the key in the header. So I'll show a quick demonstration of that. So this is my API. This is the API which has, I'll go to the resource. This is basically pulling the application configurations. I want to keep that as a protected API. I don't want to keep that as a public API so that anyone can call it. And then I'm setting the API. Now, because we'll be calling this from our website, it will be still exposed. You can just right click, do the view source, and you will get to know that what we are passing from the header. But I'm talking about the non kind of a user clients, in which the API key is still safe and secure, and only limited resources are exposed to that. That is one. Now, second thing is your protected API. So now comes the part where you want to protect your API with some kind of a user validation. So API gateway has a feature called authorizer. You can have the Lambda as an authorizer, or you can have the Cognito as an authorizer. The reason the Cognito as an authorizer makes sense because Cognito has your identity information already. You just define your Cognito authorizer, and it will actually pick up the header which you pass into the authorization. So whatever information that you are passing into the authorization, it will pick it up there. It will check with the given your kind of a Cognito pool, and if it is valid session, then only it will actually execute your Lambda functions, not otherwise. So this way, you in a normal application, if we are using the passport.js, or I am not familiar with what we use into the Python Flask or Django Flask format, but if we are using the Node.js Express, we are using the passport, then we need to write the middleware, which every request, it will validate the JOT token, and then only it will actually execute the Express.js controller, not otherwise. So this is doing the same thing. If you have a custom logic, you can actually inject the Lambda via that. So I have a set of resources which are actually protected with a Cognito authorizer. So there you can see the configurations. Okay, set profile. So here the authorization is set to that. This is still not using the oath. I'm still in the process of adding more and more thing into the book. But if you are using the oath scope, then you can actually further granular the access of the API with that. So let's say the user profile. So if you are giving an access to, if you are giving a Google Gmail access to LinkedIn to read the contacts, then your scope will become the contacts read. So that in our application will have the scope of like share files. So if the user has that particular scope, then only this API will be executed. Otherwise, the API itself will throw an error because the oath session does not carry the scope part. Scope also you can actually see in the JOT token that is generated. I mentioned so this is the documentation pending part in the Lambda. So this is the place where I mentioned that you can actually decrypt your full JOT token onto the Lambda side as well. So if you want to extract more information for your own purpose, or if you want to save something additional into the database or put some kind of an additional logic, depending on the group that you are part in, you can, the API gateway will path the entire authorization header to your Lambda functions. You can just decode it. It's by default base64 encoded. So you can decode it, and you can actually use the full the JSON part into your application. So this is how it looks onto the Lambda side. Authorization part is coming. Now, one additional thing is that when we talk about the IAM roles and policies, one thing which keeps on coming when if you're working around the administration part or the infrastructure automation part, the assume role and the pass role. The assume role is that your resource, the compute resource, which is executing the current logic, if there is a role attached to that which has the assume role, it can actually acquire a new role. So how we are doing that is, let's say you are you have given the Cognito, you have given the scope, and both are all fine, and you have now the API gateway has given the control to Lambda. Now in the Lambda, you want to further restrict the access to only those records in the DynamoDB which is pertaining to your Cognito user ID. So if you want to customize your the role inside the Lambda, what we can do is we can actually assume another role while inside the Lambda. This cannot be done directly because the STS will have its own session, but you can actually, the Lambda can assume another role. Okay, and in that role, we'll have further refined permissions, which only will work in that particular context. It will not have the free flow. So this is for those kind of situations where you want the last level fine-grained access to that. I have put a reference link to the case bean as well. So they are it's kind of a library which allows to do this RBAC role-based very detailing kind of a authorization mechanism, and this can be used along with Cognito user group to further refine the overall access to the system. If you do not want to put the logic and instead you want to go with some kind of an additional orchestration. So all of this we are doing is we are minimizing the overall coding effort, but at the same time we are actually we are using other services, so a dependency on the other services, and this is kind of becomes a some detailed orchestration where everything has to work in conjunction. If something breaks, you'll have to figure it out which part went wrong, because we are depending on a lot of these services. So that with that, I'm coming to an end of this part. I'm sure I have covered what I left on last time. In this session, from the Cognito user pool, the identity pool, rules attached to your identity pool, the policies, the OIDC, OAuth2, ID token, access token, refresh tokens. The hosted UI part we didn't see, but I will have the book. So one of the reasons I created book is it's very difficult for me to actually put everything into a single hour slides. Otherwise, what I had to do is put everything into the slides and just go through the slides. So I put these examples into different format, have it accessible to everyone so that you can actually play around with that whenever you get some time. So this will have all those additional things as well, including the OAuth2, hosted UI, and other integrations. This all covered. This covered flow, scope, claims. Claims are nothing but the variables. So it could be the username, email, phone. Scope are the verbs, actions that we need to do. Token, OIDC, flow are internals. So that's it from my side. Different hooks we have seen. Amplify is something I'll highly recommend. If you are doing something onto the front end, I have used the Vanilla JS, I have used the Vanilla JS SDK, but I'll highly recommend you go through the Amplify SDK. It has a lot of built-in components. Auth is one of the primary component which internally uses Cognito only. So you can actually do a few things really easily and well inside that.
I think Dhavalbhai, you have covered more than we could hope. With a live practical example, that was a very in-depth session for Cognito and how can we leverage the authentication part. I think you have touched based all the points that me as a developer could think of. By the way, we had one question from Naveen. He was asking. So basically, his question was, do we have to create? If you can, let me just remove the session so that you can also see it. So he had a question on, whether we need an identity pool for creating a web app or mobile app based authentication, which I've replied that we need identity pools to give access to the resources, right? AWS resources.
Yes.
We may not require to create identity pool when we need to do authentication for any web or mobile apps, correct?
Correct. That is right. But if you want to extend the access to other services, so that's why it is called Amazon Web Services. A lot of the early services, and even now as well, those are actually part of the web tier. So you have the direct APIs, you can actually use it from outside. But to use it from outside, your request should carry the proper authentication mechanism. It should have the right tokens in the request. Otherwise, you'll not be able to access it. So DynamoDB, S3, all those are part of the web services. And if you need to use it from outside, you will need the credentials. So nobody uses the fixed credentials, right? Because that will you're actually exposing your credentials to everyone. So
Correct.
The Cognito user pool and identity pool is basically a combination through which you can acquire the temporary access tokens.
Understood. And there will be last question from my side before we conclude the session. I think we didn't have so much audience today, so I'll take a few more minutes. So you mentioned about Amplify, using Amplify with Cognito, right? I've been going through it. It's really good to start up and directly integrate, with such abstract layer services like Cognito or API Gateway, or even having to, fetch details from DynamoDB and S3, right? Everything can be done very easily. It has, native components. I just need to call those components and get things moving. Question is, if I'm using other libraries, for example, I'm using Material UI as the front end, Okay, it's one of the famous frameworks when it comes to React. Now, one thing that I've seen is Amplify from get-go requires an admin privileges, for developers to start, integrate, and get resources fetched from AWS. So how do we tackle that problem?
So when you say admin, you mean admin of, in what context you need an
So,
admin?
for example, I'm setting up AWS Amplify locally, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I need to give that developer an access, an API key ID and secret to be able to fetch, necessary resources from AWS, right?
Mm-hmm.
Can't
So the
I?
client ID, it's client ID. So that is where you need to provide the client ID and the secret.
No, it's not about client ID and secret. So what I've seen is maybe I'm just starting up with Amplify. So if we need to start, okay, we have another question coming in from Naveen. Adding users to the user group, should I do in manually manner or any other way to do it automatically?
So it depends. I think this is a kind of a question again pertaining to the current application as well. So how would I add user to the admin side? It's a very legit question, right? I can do it manually as well, but manually, if you are in a production environment, you will not go inside the Cognito and then selectively add users to the particular group, right? So you will have some kind of a screen where you have a super admin or some kind of
Correct.
a identity, row identity, which has access to those features. Okay, that identity has to additional kind of a permissions, additional policy, which allows you to actually see all the data. So you have created the dashboard of all the users, and then you are saying that, okay, move this user to this group because it has access to the permission. So here you can actually play around with the services as well, permission as well, and based on your existing identity. So there is something, again, the logged in user should have the policy and the permission set correctly to move user from non-group to a particular group or move shift users between the group. I did it simply via the manual because it is meant for a very small use case, but otherwise I'll need additional screens, I need the additional policy and permissions, and I need to write the additional logic to actually shift the users. Now, what
And
I was thinking to do is I will have a list of like a predefined email address as an admin. So as soon as the user sign up is complete, it will run the post sign up hook, and it will automatically move those users into the kind of admin group. So that is one way I can do, because I don't want to do additional screens, and I know that there will be at any point of time there will be only 15-20 users.
yes, you can use. I mean, there's another question coming in. Can
Pre-auth,
we
yes.
use the?
Yes.
Yeah,
Pre-auth is also there. Pre-auth
we
is,
can do that. And
yeah.
yeah, please go ahead.
Pre-auth is again a very interesting thing. So if it's an enterprise application and I want to restrict the users to only access the application, so when they sign in between 9 to 5 or morning 8 to evening, so when I do the sign in, it will do the additional validation that this user having additional roles or additional certain things, some parameters or an intern, okay, this user should be allowed to access at this time of the day or not. So this kind of additional logic I can also play around with a pre sign in as well.
And there are other things to cover. For example, if you don't want to just allow, random signups happening on your account, what you can do is there are multiple stages when you create an account in Cognito. So you can, put that account on hold until an admin approves that particular account to be, utilized as a verified account in Cognito. So those all things can also be done, and you can use, post sign up triggers to generate an email to admin that there is a new sign up
New
happened
sign up has come.
in your pool. Do you want to approve it or not? You can create screens around it
Correct.
and validate and verify what all is happening within your application.
Yeah, the reasons the triggers are there is because the auth cannot be same for every application. Okay, so what they have done is they have actually captured the essence of it. So you have the identity provider, you have the authorization servers. So when you go into the detail of OIDC and OAuth, you'll realize that it requires resource servers, it requires authorization servers. There are standard endpoints depending on the specification of both OIDC and OAuth. So it has captured that, but every application is different, every use case is different. So if you want to extend that, you want to change that, so that is the place you are using the triggers, you are using the hooks and the Lambda combination of Lambda to actually tweak your flow, and you can do a lot of additional things.
Understood. So I think we have taken, we have gone about, our time today. So thanks a lot again for joining and, taking this time and explaining things in much details, right? I know it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to prepare such details and such use cases. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks
And
a lot,
again, sorry
guys.
for the last
Yeah,
previous session, but
that's okay.
yes, I think this gave me an opportunity to actually build something, because then only I came up that session will not be good enough to actually cover all of these things in together. Otherwise, it will be just slides I'll go through. So if I have something on the side which people can refer to whenever they want, and it's basically Cognito is something that I have realized personally that every few months, if I do not use it, whenever I again use it, I have to go to the documentation and see what I need to do next. So it's
Correct.
we cannot remember these things, and especially around the OAuth and OIDC, it's always confusing when to use which token and how do we do, and then the Amplify does it differently, JS SDK does it differently, and stuff like that. So having a reference
It
on the
doesn't
side.
end there. It doesn't end there, right? If you need to do it natively using APIs, it's a whole,
Yes,
it's
yes.
a hell lot of different process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, this is going to help me and whoever is going to use. So I think it is based on that I've created a small book, and I'll keep on adding more things. We'll keep it updated to have more features.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys, for everybody to tuning in, and I'll see you again. Watch out for the meetup messages again, so we will know who is speaking next in our session. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye. Bye bye.